Welcome to Monkey's Pro Wrestling. This is Dark Side of the Ring, the Scream Queen, Daffney. I have, let me see, 4 pages of notes. She was born Janet Spruill, Spruill. Her dad, brother, and some of her female friends from wrestling were interviewed, as well as Chris Crowbar Ford, who had become very close to her when he worked with her and David Flair. Shannon had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and that disorder causes, excuse me, because there's something, the brain has a delicate chemical balance. There are chemicals in the brain that keep it doing what it's supposed to do without doing the wrong thing. And if the brain gets out of balance, if those chemicals are in the wrong amounts, then comes mental illness. It's an illness, just like cancer or anything else. It just happens to be an illness in the brain that we treat with medication, just like anything else. It's just that the chemicals in the brain are out of whack. And so she had bipolar disorder. In this particular disorder, the chemicals in the brain that keep a constant mood and keep your mood from fluctuating are not in the correct amounts. And so you go from severely depressed to manic, where you're like, all over the place. So and there really isn't an in-between. Like for most of us, there's an in-between. We're not manic and we're not depressed. We're somewhere in between, As far as mental illness goes, it can run in families, which it does in mine. And it doesn't have to be as dramatic as a bipolar disorder or a schizophrenia or anything like that, or even a severe depression. But they're all because one chemical or another in the brain is either too much or too little. In my case, I have an anxiety disorder that is a mental illness. For whatever reason, I get more anxious than a normal person. And so I take medication to relieve the anxiety, and it also puts the chemicals back into line. I guess it depends on the illness, but for me, the idea of going off my anxiety meds gives me anxiety. I wouldn't do it. But for people with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia especially, those medications are much stronger. They're not an antidepressant, an anti-anxiety, which is an antidepressant in a higher dose, because it's harder to treat anxiety than depression. For whatever reason, you need a higher dose to treat anxiety than to treat depression with these meds. I don't know why. I don't understand brain chemistry, but but with disorders like bipolar and schizophrenia, once you're feeling better, you don't see the need to take the drugs. Or the drugs because they're antipsychotic drugs, they're very, very, very powerful drugs, not like antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds, which, as I've said, are the same drugs as antidepressants. There are side effects to the antipsychotic medications that they give them, and excuse me. And so they don't want to take it. It makes them gain weight, which happened to Daphne. It makes them nauseous. They're pretty awful drugs. But they're also pretty awful diseases. And they are diseases. Disease literally means dis-ease, not at ease. Anyway, she hated the side effects of the drugs. She hopped back and forth between depression and mania all the time. It was horrible for her and her family. After WCW was bought out, she was brought in as a one-off thing in WCW. She'd been an actress since she was a little kid. And because she did such a good job and fell in love with wrestling, they kept her on. When WWE, or WWF at the time, bought out WCW, they put her under a developmental deal which lasted for 9 months, and they canned her, which they did with a lot of people. It was after this that she got her diagnosis. She then went to Shimmer, which is an all-women's wrestling company. After that, she went to TNA. In TNA, she got close to Mick Foley. And she was close to some of the wrestlers there, some of the ladies. She was a really good person, and I'll tell you a wonderful story towards the end. She was part of Mick Foley's little crew, and Mick wanted her to be a part of the what was it called? It was basically an anything goes, no disqualification match, but it was Abyss's match, so it had a name, and he wanted her to be a part of it. And so they discussed it, and she was going to go through a table that had barbed wire on it. She was a little uncomfortable at first, but Mick's like, everything's going to be fine, and he thought it would be. When she went through the table, however, something went wrong. The table broke funny or something, and she came down on her head, causing a severe concussion. And breaking her arm. She came back about a month later. She was not recovered. The doctor told her never to get back in the ring again. And she got another concussion not long later after she came back. She was working, I can't remember who the woman's name was, but she was working a match against a large woman. And the woman landed on her, and I don't know if her head bounced or whatever it was, but she said if I had stayed in place, I probably wouldn't have gotten that concussion. She ended up with another high-grade concussion. And TNA was not paying her bills, which they should have been. And so I have 5 pages of notes, sued them. And their settlement to her was, get this, we'll give you 1,000 of your figures to sell. What? It's not going to cover her medical bills, you morons. Not to mention the fact that you're supposed to cover her medical bills. The brain injuries from her concussions messed with her fragile mental health. Another female wrestler who also suffers from bipolar disorder talked about how concussions, because it's an injury to the brain, can trigger or worsen the disorder. When we say trigger, we mean if you already have a disorder sitting in the background and something happens to you and it pushes it forward, like with my liver disease. I had chemo and it pushed it forward. I need to change your battery. Okay, I'm back. As I was saying, there are things that can trigger an illness. If there's something underlying, not really underlying, but something, how do I put this? If you're predisposed to something, in my case, liver disease, the autoimmune disease in my liver, I was already predisposed. It just needed a trigger, which in my case was chemotherapy. She already had bipolar disorder. It had already been triggered by something else. And the concussions made the situation worse because it's a brain injury. You already have a diseased brain, and then you add an injury to that diseased brain. It's a recipe for disaster. In 2014, she did stop wrestling. She and several other female wrestlers got together to try to erase the stigma of bipolar disorder. They got a tattoo, and what it is a colon, a parenthesis, and a colon. And it's a symbol of bipolar disorder because it's both a smile and a frown. So, and unfortunately, she self-medicated with alcohol until she went to rehab. She then developed a thyroid condition and had some menopause symptoms. And for some reason, with the menopause symptoms and the hormones, which also affect the brain, it was the medications for bipolar were having a hard time working with all of that. I don't understand it. I have to look it up to understand it a little bit better. And she had gained weight. Fans were being very cruel, which is so wrong. Mick Foley, Crowbar, and others tried to call her when she did an Instagram Live the day that she ended her battle with bipolar disorder. And she was basically speaking a suicide note and talking about how, and she had always said she wanted her brain to go to Chris Nowinski at the CTE center at Harvard that he created. And and then it just went dark. She just turned it off. And at the same time, she ended her life. And her dad made sure that her wish that her brain went to the CTE study came true, and that she and she became the first female to be studied. And she did indeed have CTE. Now, I want to tell you a story. Mick Foley was talking about it. There was a little girl. He was up in the middle of the night watching Forensic Files, and the case touched his heart. There was a little girl who had been run over by a car. She had been severely injured, had a brain injury which caused some loss of use. Not so much, well, I guess paralysis of certain limbs to a certain degree, so that's why I say some loss of use. And it took them a while to figure out who had hit her. She was playing in the dirt driveway of her mother's workplace. And they did finally figure it out. And her name was Vicki Lyons. So Mick Foley Googled the little girl just to see if he could find an update on her and how she was doing as an adult, because that Forensic Files was older. And it just really touched his heart. That's who Mick Foley is. And the first thing that came up was Vicki Lyons and Daffney. And he's like, this can't be the same girl. It was the same girl. Shannon trained her to wrestle for a solid 5 years because of her disabilities from the accident. That's how long it took. But she had dreamed of becoming a wrestler, so Shannon spent 5 years with her, getting her ready for her one and only match, which was against Shannon. And Shannon lost to her. Shannon did the job for her. So that's what Shannon should be remembered for, is acts like that. Acts of pure kindness, pure love. And I just think that, like I said, she should be remembered for that. But it was just something she did. And then she took her to the show and she let her beat her. And, you know, in front of all the fans and stuff. And that's a memory Vicki will have forever. She made her dream come true. And she should also be remembered for her work with the National Mental Illness National Association of Mental Illness, something like that, NAMI. Anyway, she should be remembered for her advocacy for women in the wrestling industry. There's so much for her to be remembered for that has nothing to do with her disease. And it is a disease, just like cancer or anything else. I know they call it a disorder, just like they call my anxiety disorder a disorder. And it is. In my case, it's not a disease. It's just a disorder. It's a condition that means that I'm more anxious than the average person, which is not a fun place to be. I've had some pretty bad times with it, and that's why I started taking medication. I'll be fully honest, fully upfront. And I've been doing much better. I've had moments here and there, with losing both of my parents, and stuff like that. And going through some of the things that I've been through, having to have the oral surgery alone, and all those things, just it's tough. And basically, both disorders are chemical imbalances. Now, the day she died, her friend, wrestler that also suffers from it, like I said that she was in what she feels is the most dangerous spot in the disorder because the way that she explained it is there's depression and mania, but there's also depressive mania, which I hadn't heard of, but it makes sense. Where you're in a manic state, but you're depressed. She said that's the highest risk of ending your life. She believes that's where she was when she ended hers. So, but like I said, I think she should be remembered for all the good that she did. The fight that she put up with TNA, the advocacy for female wrestlers and wrestlers as a whole, what she did for that disabled little girl. And I think those are the things she needs to be remembered for. So, thank you so much for joining me. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next week for the season finale, Muhammad Hassan, who actually was not Arab American, but we'll get into that next week after I see the episode. So, then we'll have to find something else to do once a week on the channel. God bless you, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye, guys.